And we are now live.
Are we live?
Yeah, we're live now, so...
We're live!
Yeah, so...
Welcome to the podcast that's still going amid the coronavirus and everything else going on in the world. Welcome back to the ninth corner of the Octagon.
Yes, so... Obviously, there's a lot going on right now. Actually, fun fact, Lincoln, you don't know this yet, but I'm trying out a new sort of video podcast thing. Like, I've got my screen on recording right now, just so we can talk about some of the different upcoming things with some visual representation here.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to see what this new technology does.
Yeah, exactly. We're evolving every day.
Every day. We're not perfect.
No.
We just try to become perfect.
Exactly. So, so crazy week this past week. It has, I guess that's, okay, before I talk about all that stuff, one thing I do want to bring up is that I really do like how a lot of fighters and a lot of other people are coming at this with the right kind of attitude. You know, they're treating it as if it's not necessarily that it's not happening, but that they're not going to let it stop them from doing what it is they feel like they need to do. I just got through watching a video with Derek Lewis and Ariel Helwani, just talking about Derek Lewis's next fight, in the next, the way Derek Lewis says it, in the next 2 to 3 months, so it's pretty awesome.
I mean, Joe Rogan just did a podcast today, so if he can still do it, we can still do it,
Yeah, right.
If Joe Rogan doesn't do a podcast, that's when you know something's happening.
Yeah, that's when it's all really gone to shit. And one of the things that I actually wanted to touch on that happened earlier this month, but that I didn't really get a chance to talk about. I've got it on my screen right now. It's article talking about it, and I just have it really pulled up so you guys know where I'm getting this information from. But basically, the Ion Kudabella and Magomed Ankalaev fight that was stopped prematurely. It was that terrible stoppage.
Yes.
Yeah, during it says right on here. The rematch. Well, the rematch is being posted in UFC 249. It doesn't say on here when that happened. Let me look back. I believe it was. Yes, it was Fight Night 169. It was so that was the night of the flyweight, the flyweight championship for the vacant flyweight belt.
Yes, I remember now.
Yeah, that nobody walked away with. But yeah.
That nobody walked away with.
Yeah, so that fight has been rescheduled for UFC 249. Really, I guess, just to really give us the kind of fight we were initially robbed of in the beginning.
What if the other guy gets a premature stoppage and they just have to do a trilogy fight?
I mean, that would be insane. That would be absolutely insane. Because that fight already, the original is already one of the most insane things I've ever seen coming into the sport. But if it happened the second time, I'd really be curious to see what a third fight would look like, just for the spectacle, more so than what the two fighters
that's entertainment right there. If they both get screwed over and then they have to have a third fight to really decide what happened, and then they knock each other out, that's entertainment. That's just
MMA at that point. There's no real way you can slice that other than just that.
They both retire afterwards. It's one of the most talked about things that happened in the sport in 2020.
Yeah, and then they become only famous for that one trilogy of fights with the craziest stuff to have happened.
Ever.
And then they retire immediately afterwards.
Immediately.
So
it's like we can't do it. We can't, like, even if we wanted championship, we couldn't top that.
yeah. So yeah, I guess we can go ahead and just talk about how this in the past week or so, it was the UFC extending from UFC Fight Night 170 in Brazil. They basically were trying to be one of the few organizations that were staying active during the coronavirus outbreak, and just trying to keep their events going for as long as they could with what they were able to do, based on the criteria that the U.S. government had been putting out. It initially went from 100 people being able to gather in an open space to around 50 people, and that allowed the UFC the ability to follow in the WWE's footsteps and host events with no audiences. And as we saw this past Saturday, that worked pretty well for the most part. I
didn't notice much of a difference.
Exactly, yeah. There wasn't.
It felt like you were watching the Contender Series. There's the Ultimate Fighter reality show.
Yeah.
It felt more intimate.
Yeah, it was definitely less distracting. It was more, you could really pay more attention to the fighters because you were less focused on, the crowd maybe inappropriately booing at a certain point, or just something ridiculous like that happening that distracts from the fight.
I sometimes find myself watching people's faces in the audience.
What?
What?
What did you say?
I said that sometimes there was one of the last UFCs, they had a perfect frame where you could see the guys fighting, but you could also see Joe Rogan commentating at the same time.
Right.
And I found myself watching Joe Rogan, and I think it was Daniel Cormier and Joe Rogan and maybe Dominic Cruz.
Oh.
It might have been all three of them commentating, and I found myself watching them more than I found watching the actual fight.
Well, luckily,
there's no audience though.
Yeah, luckily with this past Saturday, that stipulation seemed to work out. However, as this week has gone on, I think effective Monday, it was said President Trump put into action that gatherings for sporting events, I don't think, can publicly exceed 10 people. And Dana White has gone on record now and basically just been like, that is impossible for them to do. So as you guys can see on screen here, they've had to cancel the next 3 upcoming UFC events leading up to April 18th, UFC 249. Do you want to talk about some of these canceled events here? Because this is some heat that's really going under the radar now.
Go ahead, list them off, big boy.
Okay, well, just headlining these events, you've got Tyron Woodley versus Leon Edwards, which is a highly anticipated welterweight matchup coming out of the final welterweight match of 2019 versus Usman and Covington. This is a highly anticipated fight. Just looking at some of the other people on here, I'm not familiar with a lot of their names, unfortunately. I'd like to change that, but now, unfortunately, it's a little irrelevant because now the whole thing is canceled. And UFC on ESPN 8, this is actually something I was planning to watch with my mom and my family, just to get them interested in MMA and UFC, but now unfortunately, as you can see, it is another event that has been canceled. This was headlining Francis Ngannou and Rosenstrike. Forgive me, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his first name. And then a co-main featuring Cody Garbrandt and Rafael Assunção, I want to say.
Yeah, I believe that fight had already been canceled before that, but yes, it was planned to be on there. It is a lot of big name and star power that we're not getting now.
Yeah, Matt Brown was set to make an appearance. Greg Hardy was set to make an appearance. It's real unfortunate. A lot of these guys, especially in my opinion, the Ngannou Rosenstrike fight.
That's what I was definitely waiting for.
Yeah, that's really upsetting. We won't get to see that right away. Whether or not the UFC actually does intend to postpone these fights to another day, we're not entirely 100% positive on yet. But the last one, in the next one, it kicks off April for us. Is main event or co-main, but I guess they had to cancel whatever main event was originally set for it. But I guess the main event got bumped up to Alistair Overeem versus Walt Harris. Michelle Waterson was set to make an appearance. Big names like that. Nico Price. So basically a lot of negative stuff happening right there. Do you really think that these matchups are going to be delayed, or do you think that they are now gone with the wind?
I think some of them will be delayed, but others are going with the wind. It's like some are half and half. Like the Cody Garbrandt fight, I don't think is going to happen at all anymore because Cody said that he had some underlying health problems that prevented that fight already. So that one I think is just gone. I think the Ngannou Rosenstrike fight is just going to be pushed back because it's one that a lot of people want to see, and it really is important for where the heavyweight division is going to be at after that fight.
Right.
So I think that one they have to postpone or just make it a different time whenever it's convenient for them, as what's going on and what else they have to do with their training camps and whatnot now.
Right.
But that one I think is just going to be postponed. Some of the other ones might not work out, or they might just have different opponents, and then they might meet somewhere later down the road anyways.
Yeah.
Depending on where the rankings are after all of this.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a give and take on which ones are going to stay and which ones aren't.
Yeah. But that Rosenstrike Ngannou fight, that's a really important fight for Rosenstrike.
It's a really important fight for just the heavyweight division because we know Alistair Overeem can knock everybody out any way he wants.
Yeah.
But can he still after all this time?
Yeah, it seems like Overeem is really in a position right now where he's just fighting to stay in the top 10.
Hey, he was doing a really good job until that last 10 seconds.
He really was, but...
Yeah, he was very calculated. He wasn't casting himself like he's done in other fights. He wasn't he wasn't walking into big shots like when he fought Ngannou, or when but the last few victories, that's what he did, is he was just more calculated, wrestled more than he had in the past, and just got the W. But this last time, he lulled himself into thinking that he had won already.
Yeah, I mean, it's just as time goes on for Overeem, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is his chin's just not what it used to be. So he'll get put out a lot easier now. I mean, granted, Overeem's chin has never been up to snuff with some of the bigger defensive chins in UFC history, but especially in recent years.
It was just he went through all that K1 kickboxing before he even got to UFC, so by the time he got here, he already had been busted up enough.
Yeah, and so now, it's going to be a lot easier for him to go up against heavy hitters in the heavyweight division and get knocked out like he did against Rosenstrike because... even,
that's probably the worst cut ever, though.
Yeah, that's got to be up there as one of the worst, not necessarily injuries, but just cuts in general for MMA. It was pretty crazy. What do you think about the Tyron Woodley Leon Edwards cancellation?
I'm not sure how that one's gonna go, because then I also saw where Tyron was trying to call out Colby for a fight, with just them and the referee and cameras, pretty much.
Yeah, I was seeing that.
Or something like that, but I don't think that one's gonna happen, at least for a good while now.
Yeah, because now it's gonna be difficult for Leon Edwards to even travel anywhere. it's going to be difficult for him to, really, it's going to be difficult for him to travel anywhere and be able to go home, just because, if he left now, for instance, and wanted to make the fight happen sometime in America, if there was even a possibility to make it happen here in the States, he wouldn't be able to go home either. So he wouldn't be able to go back to Britain, and so now it almost seems like Colby Covington has kind of swooped in here at the last minute and kind of snatched up the Woodley fight, which I do have to say, whenever Usman and Covington had happened and Usman won, I don't know if you remember our specific conversations about it, but I was always saying that Covington Woodley is the next best fight there. It's just that the reason Covington couldn't do it really is he was out with a broken jaw.
Yeah, now it seems that mouth is working again.
Exactly. So now, and if
you remember, that was also a fight that they were trying to make when Colby was the interim champ and Tyron was the undisputed champ, and it never occurred.
Exactly.
For whatever reason.
Yeah, so now it just kind of seems like it's just bad luck for Leon Edwards, because, what is he really going to do now? Because he's going to be stuck waiting around while, Covington and Woodley go at it. Now Leon is probably going to be stuck fighting, not necessarily stuck. He could fight, the likes of Gilbert Burns, and then stop that freight train, and be more than ready to take on any other top contenders. He could be more than ready to take on going to a title fight, I dare say, depending on what happens with Usman and Masvidal, if that ever comes to fruition in the future.
A very good possibility if Jorge doesn't end up winning.
Yep.
The title fight, then it could be possible Leon Edwards, or if he does.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, because the thing about Leon Edwards is he's just unfortunate. He's like the person that really doesn't fit into this equation. The more time goes on, the more that this opportunity was really, I guess, stolen, for lack of a better term, from him.
I mean, if he just didn't walk up with his hands up.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, 3 beats in the combo in the face backstage, maybe it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Fuck, jeez.
One of those things where you thought you were acting cool, and then you just get 3 beats combo to the face and your entire career's over, but you don't know it yet.
Yeah, he got blitzed.
Slowly.
Yeah, that's sad to think that was like the highlight of his year. And then,
that was a year ago, and everybody forgot about him already.
Yeah.
Oh, you're the guy that got 3 beats combo?
Yeah, now that he had this chance to fight the number one contender, he's gonna be knocked out of the seating, because I mean, like, to be fair, it was always gonna be Colby and Woodley. It always just seemed destined, because like you said, Colby was meant to he was scheduled to fight him for the interim championship, or to unify, and never happened.
Yeah, unify.
And now that Woodley is not the champion, he was fighting for a spot to put him in the position to fight the champion. Being the number one contender, he was already in that position, and it was really down to Colby Covington. Honestly, like, I felt like at that point, Colby Covington was the guy to beat, and it's not really doing Tyron any favors to fight Leon Edwards. That's what a lot of people were saying, when the fight was announced, that it's a fight that only benefits Leon Edwards, because if Woodley wins, it just cements, yes, he's the number one contender for a reason. He is the person that should be, getting a rematch with Usman as soon as possible, to get his championship back, or he should be the guy that fights Covington, because Covington just put on a hell of a fight against Usman in December.
One of my favorite fights of the year.
Exactly, like that's a classic. It's a classic of the welterweight division, and that's a great title defense for Usman under his belt, and that's a great title attempt on Covington's belt that he's got now, and really it just kind of comes down to when it was announced for Leon Edwards and Woodley, it just kind of came down to, well, now this is Edwards' chance to come out on top here and really show the world he's here for a reason. He's number 4 for a reason. He's eligible to make a run at the title because he's got X amount of skills and he can prove them. But now that fight has fallen through and that's not going to happen, that doesn't seem like a possibility anymore. That doesn't seem, like that is something that could even potentially happen now for Edwards, because think about it, you've got so many guys that are vying for Covington as is. You got not just Woodley, going at him now, but you also got guys like Michael Chiesa. Michael Chiesa is going at him constantly now, so.
Oh yeah, I forgot that happened.
Yeah, so I mean, like it's really just a bad time for anybody in this division, this super stacked division, to really lose a spot. But yeah, so that's just really where I kind of stand on that. That's just, honestly, it's good for the welterweight division as a whole. Personally, it's bad for Leon Edwards. Not really. What are you gonna do?
Well, now, what if Leon Edwards versus Michael Chiesa is the fight to make on the same card as Colby and Tyron if they ever do fight in the future?
Then you know what? Make it happen. I still think that a Gilbert Burns Leon Edwards fight is.
That's a good one as well.
I think that's a really tight fight. Because Gilbert Burns just came off a great win over Damian Maia this past Saturday, which we'll get into later. But I could see Michael Chiesa being a good fight too. Michael Chiesa versus Stephen Thompson, I think is a good fight.
It's a good one as well.
There's a lot of good fights here.
Both of them coming off wins.
Exactly. I think this is if current events weren't happening right now, this would be probably one of the greatest years for MMA so far. But yeah, so that's that. Those are the canceled events. That's unfortunate for those guys. Did you hear that a lot of the guys were talking about how they wanted to be paid still?
Oh, no, I didn't see that.
Yeah, apparently a lot of the guys, not naming any names, was really upset that they weren't going to be getting paid, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, if you're not fighting, you're not going to get paid. So
it makes complete sense, but it's also, I can see what they're saying because they planned to have money at this point in time.
Exactly, yeah. And then now
but at the same time, you didn't fight yet.
I mean, here's the thing. Hopefully, Dana White has said, hopefully we can get these guys to fight at a future venue. But based on what I'm hearing, all these events, all these events leading up to this are not leading up to UFC 249 are not. It's not that they're delayed. It seems like they have genuinely just been cut from the records, and then they're kind of just continuing with business as usual. So
it's quite possible, and then maybe they put them on some other cards, or they have them as backups for other cards in case some of them get canceled.
Right. So it is going to be interesting. I'm looking at pretty much most of the card for UFC 249. It's actually not been updated. I don't think on this tab that I've got pulled up in front of me. But based on what we've got here, we Jeremy Stevens, Calvin Kattar. That's set up to be a good fight. Uriah Hall is going up against Ronaldo Souza in the main event of the prelims. Ben Rothwell is going to be on the prelims as well.
The dick kicker?
Yeah, the dick kicker. That's going to be a great one.
Skyscraper dude?
Yeah, so that's going to be nice. Looking forward to that. And then we were talking about Rose Namajunas last week, I think, in relation to the UFC Strawweight Fight Championship that had happened 2 weeks ago. And she is actually going to be fighting. She's scheduled to fight in UFC 249 against Jessica Andrade. Yeah. Yeah, in the co-main, so that's going to be great. Alexander Hernandez is scheduled to fight on the card also. Who? What?
I just love her so much.
Yeah, Rose is great. So yeah, she's scheduled to fight then. It's going to be interesting if that comes to fruition. So I guess what I really want to ask is, do you think UFC 249 is going to be canceled? Because a lot of people have been trying to say, all right, we got to face the facts. There's a huge possibility that it probably won't happen.
This is definitely a possibility that's weighing on us.
Yeah.
But do we think that we could survive without it?
I think if it needs to get postponed, I think we could deal with it.
Yeah.
If it gets if it gets outright canceled and then no longer happens at all in the future, I don't think we'll be able to cope with it properly. Obviously we'll have to survive because we can't do anything about it, but at the end of the day, we'll never feel like, we'll never truly feel like we got what we should have got. Like something that definitely should have happened didn't happen.
It's like it's just one of those battles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's Goku versus Cell. It's just one of those things that you have to see.
Yep.
And the universe is just like, no.
No, yeah. Because here's the thing. This is the 5th time that this fight has been scheduled, and now, due to world pandemic, it will likely not happen.
Do you know what's probably ironic about all this?
What?
Is that at some point, I'm sure Dana White said, no matter what, we're not going to cancel it.
Oh,
and the universe
totally.
was just like, what? Are you serious?
Like, I'm
you think this shit's going to happen? I broke Tony's knee. He was just walking backstage and tripped over a wire.
Yeah.
You don't know the lengths I'll go through, so that this fight that you all want to see is not going to happen?
Yeah, it's crazy. You guys, I have on the screen right now an article that came up today. Actually, where somebody did an interview with Dana White, where he basically goes on to talk about how he's still very adamant about UFC 249 taking place. So if there's anything that we can have confidence in, is that Dana White, being one of the greatest promoters of all time, is doing his damnedest to make this happen. Yeah, he says, let's see here, let me look for the full quote. He goes, listen, if you're a fan, a media member, whatever you might be, do you want to bet against me? You want to bet that I can't pull stuff off? So he's very adamant about this fight still taking place, but with the new recent restrictions on public gatherings for sporting events, and the fact that the New York State Athletic Commission has just recently come down with their own set of bans that makes it to where the fight absolutely cannot happen at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. The fight can't happen in New York, and the fight likely will not be able to happen in the United States whatsoever. Now, have you heard about what Khabib's father has been suggesting?
I saw that he just suggested something, but I wasn't sure if the article I was reading was accurate, so I didn't finish it.
I've got right here in the same article I'm talking about, it says, one thing is for sure, UFC 249 will no longer take place at Brooklyn's Barclays Center as originally planned, but Khabib's father is confident the UFC will be able to relocate to Dubai in time for April. According to this article, this is a quote by Khabib's father. It says, most likely it will be Dubai. Firstly, it's easier to fight diseases because of the heat, and I think the Emirates will pay for the UFC fight faster and easier. Abu Dhabi may well be, but then that's up to Dana White. I can't prove, but there are more chances there. So, interestingly enough, Khabib's father comes out and says that he not necessarily petitioning to go to Dubai, but is suggesting a relocation to Dubai. Yeah. Now, I wonder what he's basing this on, other than what he says here about the heat, being able to fight diseases, and that the Emirates are going to be able to pay, a good amount of money for this fight to happen, which I don't doubt. But then I start to wonder and I start to worry: is Tony Ferguson going to make that flight? Is Tony Ferguson, going to go to the other side of the world to make this happen?
He's crazy enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little concerning enough, because it's one of those things where it's like any kind of change to the original plan kind of makes you start, worrying and wondering about everything, because undoubtedly when this happened, as soon as we saw the next 3 UFC fight events get canceled, we kind of were suddenly awakened to how serious this whole thing had gotten, because I'll say it right now, I felt a little spoiled as a UFC fan, not just an MMA fan, but UFC fan in general, because they kind of went that extra mile to try their best to not shut down during this quote unquote crises. And now that it's really now at a point where really significant events, whole events, months of events, 3 in total, tons of fighters, missing out on a chance to do some work, it's kind of devastating. It's a little disheartening, and then now it kind of puts the entire Tony v. Khabib thing in perspective now. So it's kind of odd. I don't know how to entirely feel about this misfortune.
Me either, dude.
Yeah, it's like because at a certain point you can't even really, because think about it, in the entirety of the UFC's career they've only canceled like one event, and that was like UFC 151, I think.
And now they've canceled 3.
Yeah, 3 in a row. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's not a pay-per-view event, true, but that's 3 total events with at least 3 to 5 fights that I would have gladly paid pay-per-view money for in between the 3 of them,
Just a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in right now. And
everything is stacked against this card. They had the cut man from the Nate Diaz Jorge Masvidal fight.
Yeah.
They have the cut man for that.
Yeah.
It's not going to be able to happen in New York anymore. There's a global pandemic going on. Everything is stacked against this card, which is why I think it'll go off without hitch.
Very, very, very glamorous perspective you have there.
I'm trying my best to find the light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, I commend you, sir. We certainly need it now in these times of need. Now that we have to go many months, well, like a month, until we can even possibly get word. I mean, Dana White could come out tomorrow and say there's absolutely no way the Ferguson Nurmagomedov fight is going to happen.
And then he's going to have to retract his previous statement of saying everybody thought I could pull this off.
Yeah. So, he's hoping that one of the most anticipated fights in MMA history will actually go down next month.
Maybe 5 times the charm, maybe it's going to be 6 times the charm, maybe.
Yeah, so fingers crossed. We'll do what we can. So now, I guess I just want to move into the direction of, you saw the Kevin Lee Oliveira event, right? UFC 170, Fight Night 170.
Yes, I did.
I figured now that we've covered pretty much most of the in the Octagon stuff, we can actually position ourselves in the 9th corner of said Octagon and talk about the end.
Just give some opinions on what happened on the last UFC event for a while.
Yeah, because it is going to be a minute, so hopefully we'll be able to fill the time with different content because...
A new series that we've been planning?
Oh yeah. I would show you guys on the screen, but I don't feel like pulling it up right now. What it is we're working on, but we're working on something, and yeah. I mean, we'll still try to do the weekly podcast, just so we can talk about any updates and stuff as this quote unquote crises progresses. So
And maybe we'll talk about maybe we'll rewatch some old footage, talk about some older stuff, bring up some topics, some fights that never happened. We don't know yet.
Exactly. Maybe some reaction videos.
When we get there.
Exactly. We'll see. So yeah. So basically, I just wanted to go over this real quick. So we had Francisco Trinaldo versus John Makdessi. This was the opening bout for the card, the main card, and it was good. It was okay. I gotta say,
it was okay.
Yeah, it was alright. But I mean, like Francisco Trinaldo did great. I do have to say, Makdessi.
It was more one-sided.
Yeah, I was gonna say Makdessi was, he had a problem with aggression. He had a real problem really making any kind of headway in the fight. Really kind of doing whatever it is that he needed to do to get things really rolling in there, because he survived. He survived, but I mean, he didn't really do much else. I mean, he did a good job of keeping a distance when he could. His footwork was I noted, he has good footwork. He's got good positioning, but he just wasn't really willing to get in there and make some tough decisions. Exactly. Yeah, so that's really just what I thought about it. I don't know if you have any significant thoughts about it or not.
Not necessarily. I thought there was some good, like you said, some good footwork. Both of them had some good moments, but for most of the fight, it was very one-sided.
Yeah. So now, getting into something I actually really do want to talk about a little bit is Johnny Walker versus Nikita Krylov.
Johnny Walker's not turning out to be as good as a prospect as we thought, huh?
Dude, that was exactly what I was going to talk about. I was going to be like, I almost wanted to make an entire separate thing about what happened to Johnny Walker. What is going on with Johnny Walker? Because this is not the Johnny Walker, we saw. Because what is he? He's barely close to. He's a little over a year into his UFC career, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And so he did great in his first outings, but now he's lost his last two, one in spectacular fashion, and then this one in a level of fashion where it almost looked like he just should not have been in the octagon with that guy, with Krylov, who put on a fantastic performance, I have to say. Like, the guy was just so technical in his grappling. It was truly beautiful. And I gotta say, man, Johnny Walker was just outclassed in that fight. And so
you ever seen somebody do the worm so hard that it ruins their career?
It's Johnny Walker, isn't it?
It's Johnny Walker.
Yeah, because he hurt himself in early 2019 doing something like dislocated his shoulder doing the worm after a fight. Now be honest with me. He won and immediately dislocated his shoulder showing off. Be honest with me. Do you genuinely believe that has had a significant impact on...
Psychologically, yes.
Psychologically, really? Okay. To what effect? Explain. Elaborate.
I think just how it's prank. I don't think that necessarily that is the thing that ruined his entire career. Just that. I think that was just a catalyst for the events that have followed.
Very interesting. Yeah, because
he's celebrating, immediately broke his shoulder, then had to recover from that, train for another fight against Corey Anderson, who was just not having it that day.
Yeah, he was having a bad day.
He was just not taking no for an answer that day.
Yeah.
And then, after having overcome those two injuries, he won that fight, but it kind of felt like he lost after he was given that interview where he felt like such a dummy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just that, and then the kind of humiliation that you would feel after those two things happening, and then training for this next fight, not knowing if it's going to go your way or not, or if you're going to be made a fool again, and then it happening like all your worst fears happening because you're just getting outclassed.
I think I have a picture pulled up of Johnny Walker right before he fell to the ground when he did his worm, before he dislocated his shoulder. But here's the thing. Okay, so here's the thing.
Here's the thing.
When I was okay, so Johnny Walker, I know he's talented. He's a talented kind of guy. And so one of the things I was, and I'm bringing this up just for sake of discussion, really, because I think it's interesting to really study what's going on with Johnny Walker right now. It's like, okay, so where was he? Where was he mentally after his loss to Corey Anderson, going into this fight with Krylov? And
exactly.
That he was really somewhere where, in a position where Corey Anderson, ironically, would end up against Blachowicz, was someone who was just really focused on future events rather than focusing on, the game that they have now. And so I know for a fact that going into the fight with Krylov, I've got it pulled up on the screen here. It's actually a really good article. I suggest anybody read just to really understand what it is that Johnny Walker has been implementing in his regiment, to train himself. And he's been, training with. He's been working under the coach of. Well, I want to say, positively speaking, he has been training with George St. Pierre out of the TriStar gyms. And that's great. Kudos. If you can get trained by arguably the greatest of all time, then good for you. You're doing great. However, he's being coached by forgive me if I pronounce this wrong. Firas Zahabi. It's Georgia's coach, if I'm not mistaken.
It is.
Yes. So yes. Did I say unfortunately? I did not mean that. Basically, yes. This is great because Johnny Walker is now being backed and supported by a division of talent that is responsible for one of the greatest of all time. And it's good that he was training with these guys after his unfortunate, unfortunate outing with his previous coach, who he was with in the Corey Anderson bout. But yes, so he went into this. He got Johnny Walker got brand new management in Paradigm, the company that, or it's more publicity, I guess I should say, rather than management. But it's the same company that boasts Conor McGregor, Israel Adesanya, and Chris Cyborg as some of their clients. And so yeah, and so he signed with them for representation, and he's been working with one of the greatest of all time and the greatest of all time's coach, and he has,
Does that make him the greatest coach of all time?
It's still up for debate. But he was working on trying to make himself a more well-rounded fighter. To really work on certain things like his takedown defense and other things.
Really worked.
Exactly. But also, don't forget to stay focused on his. But also stay focused on his unique and energetic style of striking, which is something that they wanted to, stay natural with and not really interfere that base, fighting style. However, that said, now knowing all those things leading up to the fight, the real thing we have to ask ourselves is what happened in the fight that led to, spoiler alert, Johnny Walker's defeat to Nikita Krylov, if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Just let me know in the comments. Because when you watch the fight, you almost kind of say to yourself, what is Johnny Walker doing? In the sense of, like, you know, you notice he's not taking advantage of certain positions. You know, it seems he's a little uncomfortable on the blow. It looked like he was getting a little gassed out pretty easily. You know, kudos to him for going 3 rounds in a fight. If I'm not mistaken, it's the first time he's gone the distance in a fight. Could be wrong, but
I think most of them were pretty short.
Yeah, because I know leading up to his fights with Corey Anderson in the UFC, he had, I think, most of his fights didn't make it past 2 minutes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, something like that. I remember some stat like that.
Yeah, and so he lost that fight genuinely because his grappling was just not up to par, and his ability to do scrambles, his ability to engage in somewhat basic submissions, I have to say, was kind of astounding, because if one of his main goals was to keep it standing, then his takedown defense didn't necessarily reflect that. You know, he was having a hard time getting his back off the cage, and he was having a hard time keeping his opponent at a preferable distance that favored Walker's own striking, because even when it came to on the feet, it almost seemed like Krylov was outpacing him a little bit, and it was very interesting to say the least, because you wouldn't expect that kind of performance from someone like Johnny Walker, and I mean, like, not to say that it was embarrassing, because I don't want to go that drastic, but it was definitely kind of visibly noticeable where Johnny Walker is now in terms of some of the high levels of competition, because he's
but he's also still new and still young, so it's possible after these 2 losses, he could skyrocket, he could get even better.
Yeah, because
so this is one of the things where we're seeing somebody very early in their career already starting to take a few steps back, so we'll see if he starts running or not soon.
Yeah, because he's still young, he's still 27. So he's got a lot, he's got a lot to go for, forward to, I should say, and I have yet another article, lo and behold, I've pulled up here, where it's just basically an interview. It went up today. It's just about Johnny Walker, saying that this loss isn't the end, it's just the beginning for me. And that's good. That's a great attitude to go into it with. Really happy for him. Hopefully, he said he's going to continue his training at TriStar. So hopefully that works out for him.
Gets better then.
Do what?
The longer he spends with GSP and GSP's coach, and at that academy that has a lot of great people there, I'm sure we'll just see him keep getting better. For maybe not hit his full potential yet, but we'll see how much better he can get,
Yeah, because some people would even say that George St. Pierre is one of the best grapplers in UFC history, so being able to train under him is going to be great, especially if George St. Pierre can give him some. I've heard he was giving him some tips, he was giving Walker tips in how to fight from the cage, defend himself with his back against the cage. I don't know where that training was this past Saturday. My heart kind of goes out to him. Yeah, it just hasn't really clicked. And you got to keep in mind this article.
He's still not used to it, versus he's also still not used to having matches that last more than a minute.
Yeah, and this article I referenced earlier, talking about his lead up to the fight with Krylov, goes into pretty good detail about how Johnny Walker does a lot of traveling when it comes to his camps. Like, he does camps all over the place. He kind of doesn't stay in one place when it comes to his training, and part of me kind of wonders if that also takes a toll, that he's kind of doing a lot at once. He's not giving it enough time to sink in when it needs to. So there's a lot going on here, and really what it comes down to, what my co-host Lincoln said here, that it just hasn't clicked yet for Johnny Walker. Yet his wild and his unique striking has pretty much gotten him to the point where he's at right now in the UFC. And really, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong here, Lincoln, but I do believe that Johnny Walker is now at a position where he's reached the threshold of what it takes to be a top tier contender, and what it takes to be alongside these top tier guys. And now that he's at that threshold, he has to utilize more tools, and he has to grow as a fighter in order to develop the kind of skills necessary to deal with a very wide range of different fighters. So yeah, that's basically where I think he's at. What do you think?
I completely agree. He just got to polish some stuff, and if he wants to succeed, he's got to get a little bit more technical with his chaos.
Exactly. So that's basically where Johnny Walker's at. I'm really interested to see where he goes in the future. Moving on to this next bout that I've got here, this lightweight bout that occurred immediately after this. This was very interesting just because of how the victor kind of acted. It's very strange. And you know which one I'm talking about. Hinato Moicano versus Demir.
Oh yeah, I was confused for a second. I thought you were talking about Kevin Lee.
No. This one was very interesting. Still lightweight. It was still a lightweight bout. So relevant. It is relevant to the nature of the main event, but it is not. So this was a good fight. It ended in under a minute via guillotine, I believe, guillotine submission, and it ended weird because Renato Moicano was giving his subbed opponent like this really intense stare down, and kind of gotten his, not necessarily advanced in any way, but was kind of adamantly in his face. And Demir, his opponent, kind of was firing back, and Hanato was, also, they just started firing back and forth, blah, blah, blah. Demir's demanding a rematch. Hanato's blowing him off. And then when he was asked about it post-fight, he didn't really reference it. He just kind of said things got a little intense, but I don't know. It was odd. And then he called out, some people, and then it just got even crazier. And now it's just like, okay, great. Now after some crazy post-fight nonsense, first of all, after a great fight, some crazy post-fight nonsense, and now a crazy post-fight call-out, now Renato Moicano is just right to the top of my list here. What did you think about that fight? Because I don't even think Moicano is in the top 15, and he was calling out the likes of Dan Hooker and Paul Felder specifically, if I'm not mistaken, which is very interesting. What did you have to say about that?
So I thought it was a great fight, and then I was laying in bed watching it, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that was a good fight, and then that happened, and I sat up for a second, and I was like, what? Yeah. Like, I don't remember any animosity leading up to the fight or anything.
Yeah.
Like, why did that light switch just flip?
Like, it just came out of nowhere.
And then the next day is when I watched his press conference type thing where he's answering questions.
Uh-huh.
And I was just like, what is going through this guy's head right now? Like, are you just high on adrenaline?
Yeah.
But it was I don't know what to make of it necessarily, because I was taken aback by it, because I wasn't expecting it whatsoever. Like, I was just watching it, not, like, I was watching it, but I was more waiting for the next few fights, and then that happened, and I was like, okay, well, that made this part of the show more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, like it kind of just snuck up on you. It was very interesting. I do think he's a skilled fighter. It was just
He's
weird.
a possible top 10 contender soon.
Yeah, it was just weird that he never even really kind of answered why it was that he did what he did post fight. It could have just been that he was being kind of a douche, overly imposing over the opponent he just beat, and his opponent probably, you could argue rightfully, was just kind of like, hey man, get out of my face, whatever.
Like, I get it, you won.
Yeah, like kind of just go on, do your thing, get out of my face, let me do my thing, let me handle my loss. So it was interesting. Whether or not, the fight was so short, I don't know what, and I don't know a lot about Renato Moicano to begin with, but I'm interested in anybody fighting Paul Felder. Paul Felder just came off of a nominee for Fight of the Year so far, so I'm interested in Paul Felder fighting anybody right now.
Yeah, I think he said he's hung it up, but if one comes around, he might jump on it.
Exactly. Like he said, post-fight he was retiring, then he said he's probably not retiring after that. Now he's in a position where he's like, I could do whatever I want, just hang around for a while, as long as I fight at least like once a year whenever somebody comes around asking for it. I think if anybody offers to fight Paul Felder now, he'll take the fight.
It's possible.
It's possible. We'll see. We'll see. He might not fight this guy in particular, just because of how low he is, and just because of how.
Maybe that's why he fights him.
Maybe it could be one of those things where Paul Felder steps into a gatekeeper position, which would be interesting. Paul Felder's always going to be a great athlete, so it's always going to be interesting to see who he goes up against, because then he basically will start filling out Donald Cerrone position. And it'll be like, okay, well, if you beat this guy, then you stand here. You stand in this regard. So it's going to be interesting. So moving on to the co-main event, we have Damian.
Not how I thought this was going to go.
You didn't, dude. I told you. I literally
know.
I literally said.
I didn't believe you. I was like, Garrett's instincts are for shit. I don't believe him.
No, dude. I understand. After the John Jones Dominic Reyes prediction, I wouldn't believe me either. Like, I would not trust anything I had to say. But, however, when it came to this, I was like, boom, called it. Yes. High five, Garrett. Yourself. Yeah. But yeah, if you guys missed when we talked about this last week, I think we briefly talked about it. I think we barely really scratched the surface. I really tried my best to go into detail about what I felt like the potential for this fight was going to be able to bring, because last week I tried my absolute hardest to really go into detail about both of these men's jiu-jitsu backgrounds and why it was so important to understand how proficient they both were within that practice, because then that just paints the picture. Okay, it's gonna come. Some people believe it's gonna come down to whose BJJ is better, but really in some of these situations it comes down to, well, if they're both great jiu-jitsu practitioners, and you saw these guys out on the ground, they were going at it, doing craziness, flip-flopping all over the place, some high-level jiu-jitsu not sparring, but, fighting there. That was rolling, yes. That was some high-level jiu-jitsu rolling there. That was just, boom. You're looking at two masters going at it, and if you guys have any interest or in BJJ, if you're new to it, if you're new to MMA and you want to understand what high-level grappling looks like, not the kind of stuff that crowds would boo at, which I'm glad no crowd was there to boo at this, because this stuff was just beautiful. You go and you watch Damian Maia versus Gilbert Burns. That is some high-level jiu-jitsu right there. But
I love the scrambles.
exactly, and just the way they were able to move fluently from one position to the next it was beautiful, and how they were able to counter each other perfectly, which segues into my point about how they were not necessarily that they were going to be even, but that it was a high possibility that it was going to happen.
Be more of a competition.
Exactly. But last week, I made a point of pointing out that when it comes to Gilbert Burns, if you go and you look at the man's history, he has a history of knocking some dudes out. Damian Maia has got a few, TKO, KO submissions to his name, but Gilbert Burns has more than half the amount Damian Maia has in a more consistent fashion. And I looked at that and I said to myself, that's going to be the difference right there. That ability to take it to somebody and trade hands and really showcase your striking capability in the end, I think is going to be the major deciding factor. And lo and behold, it was. Gilbert Burns spectacularly knocks out Damian Maia in round 1 beautifully, I gotta say.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, so I don't mean to rub it in anybody's face or anything, but
you're 1 for 1, bud.
Exactly, 1 for 1. Let's go. So yeah, that was great. Glad that kind of came together in my favor. Performance of the night, which it should be. What did you think about this bout, man? Because this was like my second. This was tied for favorite bout of the night right here. This was a great bout.
It was just art, is what it was.
Yeah, this is amazing. Like, Damian Maia really came in there with 100%. Gilbert Burns went in there with 100%. And in some instance, it almost looks like Damian Maia had a major control over most of the fight. Looking at some of the significant strikes and stats that I've got on the screen here for you guys as we just go through it. Obviously, strikes are going to be in favor of the man who knocked the other guy out. They're not really listing the control here, but yeah, that's basically it. It looked basically when it had started, Damian Maia was in control, but Gilbert Burns was not. I guess you can't really call it control when Gilbert Burns isn't really, letting himself go. He was actively responding to all the different interventions and attempts made by Maia. So that was really great. Do you have any final thoughts on that particular bout? Because I don't mean to sound like I'm speedballing, but we are close to wrapping up. So we got to get to this last fight.
So I just wanted to say that it looked like they both gave it their all, and when the wrestling was canceled out, you saw who was the better striker.
Yeah. So, boom. So, anyway. Moving on to the final fight of the night, and the final fight in UFC history ever, was actually a really good fight. If we had to end on a fight for a while, this was a really good fight to go back and really analyze and study. Was Kevin Lee versus Charles Oliveira. This was a good fight. This is a close fight, and this was an interesting fight. I'm gonna go ahead and just, since this is the last one we're ending on, I'm gonna pull up the stats for this, and we're gonna go over it real quick. This was a good fight because this was one of those instances where it was classic. I don't want to say classic grappler versus striker, because Kevin Lee is pretty great wrestler, American wrestler. I think he was All-American. I can't really remember off the top of my head. But going up against black belt Charles Oliveira, so this was a pretty great fight. Kevin Lee was kind of leading in terms of strikes overall on the ground. He was leading by significant strikes. He was leading by strikes in general. But when it came to the grappling exchanges, it was almost like it was a different world, because once it got to the ground, it was like Kevin Lee was. I kept commentating during the fight that it appeared as though the two were evenly matched up to a point where it seemed like Kevin Lee was just one step behind.
Especially when he was doing the weird leg locks, and he was just Kevin Lee had to like look over his shoulder to try to throw a punch.
Yeah, and then it got to that one point where it almost looked like Kevin Lee's like knee was gonna snap. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was some intense stuff right there.
He was trying to do like a calf slicer at one point.
Oh yeah. Did you watch the Joe Rogan live commentating of that fight with him and his buddies?
Yeah, I didn't watch all of it, but I watched up to a point, and then I skipped a few moments and stuff because it's like 3 hours long, and they don't talk about the fights very often.
I'm just talking about like the 16-minute like part where they actually like watch the fight.
No, I didn't see that.
That was a good one. That was.
Or at least I didn't see the entire 16 minutes. I don't think. I think I skipped into it or part of it.
It was just funny, just because basically they were just saying the same stuff I was saying, like just freaking out about the leg. And I mean, really, if you and I were just, to say, yeah, Kevin Lee kind of came in there and tried his best to control Charles Oliveira, but Charles Oliveira really just went from one submission attempt to the next. When you talk about someone that
was piecing him up on striking, was actually doing a good job.
Yeah, like he was like yes, you guys can see Kevin Lee was leading in strikes. In terms of total strikes.
But how significant were they?
Exactly. It was pretty dead even in terms of significant strikes. The guys were actually very close most of the fight. In terms of significant strikes, I think I blundered earlier. Charles Oliveira is actually leading by 43 to Kevin Lee's 41. But that goes to show you how close it was. In terms of total strikes, yes, Kevin Lee wins out. And in terms of strikes by position on the ground, when it came to ground and pound, Kevin Lee was doing a really good job, especially at the end of the first round when he got Charles Oliveira in a really good position, and then Kevin Lee just he stood up and he just laid some good right hands into Charles Oliveira with like 10 seconds left to spare in round one. And then going into round two, it kind of started becoming this. It started becoming really clear that Charles Oliveira was able to dominate, when it came to the ground game, and then Kevin Lee was trying to. And again, I think this is where it really became obvious in the second round that Kevin Lee was not struggling per se, but was always just lacking that one extra edge, to stay even, because it always looked like Charles Oliveira was just one step ahead the entire fight, to a point where on some levels it looked like Kevin Lee was fighting, every second of that fight just to stay in the fight, whereas Charles Oliveira was just making it look rather easy. He was really making it look like he was barely breaking a sweat. And then going into the third round, you've got Kevin Lee doing something that you could argue is probably not a good idea, and I didn't think it was a good idea. Yeah, do you want to tell them?
There's like a last-ditch effort. Maybe this works, maybe this doesn't.
Yeah, and what had happened was that for some reason, so like when Kevin Lee in the fight would say go for trips or takedowns in the first two rounds, and he would put Oliveira down. Oliveira would either reverse it, or he would immediately put it into a position where it was advantageous for him. In the second round alone, he almost got both an armbar and a triangle choke within 20 seconds of each other, within the same I forget what you call them, but within the same scramble, he just chained. That's what I meant to say. He was just in the same chain. He had linked an armbar that Kevin Lee had to completely, flex the absolute shit out of his arm just to even try and make it out of. Use every ounce of his strength to try and, get this black belt off his side, and then immediately into a triangle choke. Oliveira was on 110% of his BJJ game going into this, with his very adequate striking game. Going up against someone like Kevin Lee in striking is no small feat, And for some reason, however, in the third round, Kevin Lee took it upon himself to almost immediately go for a takedown, which put him in a position for Charles Oliveira to sink in a very tight guillotine choke and essentially choke Kevin Lee out.
It's one of the easiest submissions to get sometimes.
Yes, I mean, like it happened very fast, very swift, and Charles Oliveira sunk it in as quickly as possible, and right before he was, about to go out, Kevin Lee tapped. Unfortunately, what I think had happened, I think it was captured pretty perfectly on the cameras, that Kevin Lee did go out, and then he kind of for like a split second, and then he kind of came back to, and when he came back to, he was like, "Oh, I'm still in the fight," and then he was like, "Oh, I'm in referee's position." Behind Oliveira, so we're just going to keep wrestling and fighting, only to find out, he had lost the fight because he had tapped and he didn't even know. And I think that's one of those things where it's like the tap was so blatant.
It's kind of half in reality and all, so I'll give that to him.
Yeah, I don't agree with some people that are kind of giving Kevin Lee this cold shoulder of, oh, you tapped and then you try to pretend you didn't tap, and I don't think that's what happened. People like Jorge Masvidal, were trying to say.
I saw that he said that. And I was like, too much.
Yeah, I was like, come on, I think it's pretty obvious if you watch the replay. Kevin Lee has like almost like a full second before he actually snaps back to reality and is like, oh, we're fighting, and tries to fight Charles Oliveira.
Gravity.
Yeah, so I don't think that's really necessarily fair. However, what I do think is fair is criticizing Kevin Lee for his decision to engage in the takedown. Because I think even Kevin Lee
has gone right into an easy one.
Yeah, I mean, he set it up perfectly because here's the thing, you have to have known, especially leading up to this point, where someone who, like I said, was able to effortlessly chain arm bars into triangles, has a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and has, I think, the most submission wins in UFC history, or something like that.
It might be in lightweight.
In the lightweight division, at 13, 14 now, I think. But I mean, you got to go in there and you got to understand that's what you're going up against. It's the same thing as, for a famous example for new people, Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 1. That was a classic example of somebody initiating a takedown on someone they probably should not be initiating the takedown on.
Especially in this state.
Exactly, because you could argue that if Kevin Lee had kept going the way he was going, he likely maybe could have pulled a split decision on the scorecards, or he could have ended up knocking out Oliveira, excuse me. But initiating grappling exchanges like that with a high-level grapple artist is just begging for the kind of results that Kevin Lee got. And
exactly. Especially when it's a little sloppy.
Exactly, and you would have thought with the first few attempts that it kind of would have been apparent. He engages this takedown, and then boom, it's reversed. Or he engages this takedown, and then boom, it's immediately put into a full guard position, and now Oliveira is fighting for triangles. It's kind of like one of these things where Kevin Lee had told himself in some post-fight interview, I think he explains this thought process, but he kind of goes on to say, I felt like I wasn't in control of the fight, and I needed to do what I could to take control of the fight. And for a lot of guys, when they think of taking control of the fight, that means I gotta grapple this guy, I gotta make myself look dominant and impose on him by just kind of throwing him around. But at the end of the day, that's not even what was happening leading up to that moment. And for Kevin Lee to think that he was going to be able to take control of the fight in that specific way,
kind of silly.
It just kind of comes up to dumb. It's a rookie mistake. That's, I can't necessarily blame him. He did what he felt like in the moment he had to do but it proved to just be the wrong thing. And I mean, like, I knew it, the commentators kind of knew it, Kevin Lee knew it, obviously, as soon as it happened. And then Charles Oliveira knew it, and that's how Charles Oliveira ended up winning that bout. And now you've got Charles Oliveira out here asking for fights against Nurmagomedov or whoever's the champion. Like,
I would love to see it.
Do what?
Love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I would love to see an Oliveira versus Nurmagomedov fight, because now you've got Nurmagomedov going up against an actual high-level grappling artist, which would be amazing. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't necessarily know if that's a fight he could get right now, because if Nurmagomedov wins against Ferguson and then he goes on to try and fight Conor McGregor, then it just causes more shit down the line. And, you know, Oliveira, I feel like realistically Oliveira is not going to be able to fight either Ferguson or Nurmagomedov right off the bat. I don't know. If Nurmagomedov wins, I don't see it. If Ferguson wins, I don't necessarily see it, just because I know Dana White and the UFC have got their hands full with trying to make matches for other guys in the lightweight division, which, again, is a super stacked division, so that's hard to really come up with any solid ideas there. You know, Oliveira.
Wait, I got one.
What's that?
Dan Hooker Oliveira.
That would be a great fight. Dan Hooker Oliveira, I think, is a great fight, because if Dan Hooker can't get his fight with Justin Gaethje, because Justin and McGregor are going to be happening, you know, sometime maybe in the summer, then that could be the perfect fight for Dan Hooker, because I don't really see Dan Hooker going up against anybody else. You know, Donald Cerrone says he's going to be fighting again soon, but that's not determined. That's yet to be determined, who that opponent is, when that's even going to end up happening. If Donald Cerrone is even in a recovery position to be able to even start camp now, you know. So Dan Hooker just came off a great fight with Paul Felder. Charles Oliveira and Dan Hooker, that's probably Lincoln. That's probably the best option, you know, for that guy.
It'd be great. I would love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Alec Quinto.
See how good Dan Hooker's grappling is.
How good Dan Hooker can do against a black belt like Oliveira would probably be a true test, to his greatness, and really, it'd be kind of like that thing that says, okay, now you've really crossed the threshold into top 5. You know, now you are
exactly
the top 5.
Either way, if Oliveira would be Dan Hooker, then you'd be like, okay, Oliveira is one of the top 5 great ones.
Yeah, because if he can end Oliveira's win streak right now, that would be impressive, because I think he's got the longest current active win streak. So that'd be pretty amazing if Dan Hooker could put a stop to that. But yeah, that's just speculation. What is Kevin Lee going to do now that he's dropped in the rankings to number 10? You know, he's going to be dealing with a lot of guys that he's already fought before. He's going to be dealing with a lot of competition. You know, he's already dealing with a lot of naysayers that are saying maybe Kevin Lee should make the transition to welterweight. I don't know.
It'd be pretty interesting to see him at welterweight, though.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, is it really a good move for Kevin Lee? Because Kevin Lee moved to welterweight one time before to fight Rafael Dos Anjos, before Dos Anjos went back to lightweight, I believe, or I think I got that backwards. But the point here is that he went up to welterweight, lost, and now it kind of seems like he's stuck back in the lightweight division because he can't deal with the level of competition in the welterweight division. He might not have the added strength or speed that comes with being that size, and so he tries to make the most of that power in the lightweight division. But now the problem is he can't even make weight in the lightweight division. So it's goofy, because Kevin Lee has a position. He is a very young guy as well. He's just like Johnny Walker, where, in my opinion, more so than Johnny Walker, is in a position where he is far further along in his evolution as a fighter and really just needs to evolve just a few more steps to be on the same level as some of these top tier guys like Oliveira, and be on the same page as some of his contemporaries, some of his peers. If he goes up to the welterweight division, I don't know if that's necessarily smart for him right now, because Rafael dos Anjos is still running around. You've still got guys like Damian Maia and Gilbert Burns, who are also top tier jiu-jitsu guys. Don't know if that's necessarily something Kevin Lee wants to get into right now, or if he wants to get into big, crazy striking matches with guys who are decorated striking scholars, we'll say, in the likes of Stephen Thompson.
Of course.
So that is a lot of competition that I don't want to say that Kevin Lee can't handle. I don't necessarily think it is something that he should focus on. I think what he needs to do right now is he needs to reassess, focus on his skill set, and be able to work on getting better in the lightweight division and just make the most out of that, because some crazy stuff is going to be happening to the lightweight division soon. Like, I can feel it. Like, I get this feeling that some crazy stuff is going to be happening. It's going to be wild. It's kind of like how the light heavyweight division was for a hot minute there, for a few months there, and then all of a sudden Dominic Reyes happens, Corey Anderson happens, suddenly all the pieces are starting to fall into place, and everybody's a lot happier now, everything's looking good, and everything just got changed up, and we're all happy about it. And the same thing is going to be happening to the lightweight division. It's going to be wild. It's going to be crazy. But yeah, I think that's all I've got on the agenda for right now. So, what do you got?
I want to see how this turns out, and I want to work on a new project, bud.
Yeah.
I think with all the stuff going on, this is the perfect time to just lay it out.
For sure. So, look for that in the near future, and I will definitely catch you guys in the next week's podcast, next week's showing of Ninth Corner of the Octagon. Lincoln, do you have any final words before I smidge you just out of here?
Live long and prosper. Exactly. Be safe out there.
Yeah, keep on punching. Roll with the punches, you know what I'm saying? And we'll definitely see you guys later. Peace.
Peace.